Welcome to the Sharp Betting Pod presented by OddsJam with your hosts, Randall and Steve. You can follow us on Twitter at Sharp Betting OJ. We are going to do this podcast twice a week to discuss the previous week in the NFL, as well as to take a look at the upcoming week in the NFL. Steve, thanks for coming on.
Hey, Randall. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
For today's podcast, kind of want to focus on, last week's NFL. And, I know you have a power ratings model that you use. And
Yep.
is that something that you would mind sharing, with our listeners? Just some of the power ratings on the games you had, last week. Where you maybe saw value and maybe some that kind of lined up with the line that was given by the sports books.
Yeah, absolutely. So, just to give a little bit of a background for listeners who aren't familiar, um, pretty much every professional sports bettor does this. And actually, the sports books themselves have a power rating system, and that's how they come up with the line for the most part. On very rare occasions, they'll deviate from it, but I would say probably 99% of the time, they'll just open the line according to their power ratings, and then they'll let the market decide, obviously, which way the line moves. So there's a variety of ways to do it, but the way how I do it, and I think a lot of other professionals in the space, is you just rate the teams from basically 1 to 32, but it doesn't have to be like that because some teams can be tied. So basically, how you do it is you start off with a base of 100. So that's the score of an average team. And then, depending on how many points you think a team is better or worse than an average team, you just add a point. So, for example, on my power ratings, I have the Bucks as my number one team in the league. I have them rated as 107.5, and then my number 31 ranked team is the Houston Texans, and they're at a 91. So they're 9 points worse than an average team. And then, obviously, every other team falls somewhere in between. And then what you basically do is you just take the rating of the team who's at home, and then every team has a rating for home field advantage. So for me, that ranges from 1.5 points to 4 points. The team that has the least home field is obviously, I mean, pretty much everyone knows this, the Los Angeles Chargers. They play in that small stadium. It's almost always filled with the opposing team's fans. I think last night they said there were 75% Raider fans. Now, obviously, Las Vegas is close to LA, so, and those fans travel extremely well as it is. But even if it's an average team that's or an average fan base that's far away, it's still at least 50-50. So for that reason, I don't give them the full 3 points. Most teams I give 3 points. A few teams I'll give 3.5, like Baltimore or Denver because of the elevation. I actually am giving Oakland or Las Vegas rather. Gotta be saying that 3.5 in that Death Star. Especially this year early on, those uh, those fans are just raucous. And then there's a few stadiums that I give actually 4 points to. Not many. Kansas City, Seattle, and Minnesota. Mainly because of just the way how those stadiums are structured. Kansas City set the record, I think, for the loudest fan noise, which was then exceeded by Seattle, and obviously Minnesota with that crazy skull chant. It's an insane environment. So that's basically how it works. And then so you just add the home team, their rating plus the rating for the home field advantage, and then you subtract the rating for the other team, and that gives you, what I think should be the quote unquote fair price, what my power rating price is. And then you can compare it to the Las Vegas number. And if there's a discrepancy, then, that's a starting point for the handicap. Now, obviously, you know, the power ratings are only as good as you are accurate, right? So if you're way off and you have a team power rated way higher than another team, but the power ratings aren't accurate, then it's worth nothing. So, I'm not so cocky as to think that, I have the best power ratings in the world or anything like that, but it's definitely a good starting point. And so far this season, it's been pretty spot on. I mean, last week, so the way how I usually do it is if there's a 3.5 point or more discrepancy, then I'll most likely bet that for at least a standard unit. And yeah, last week I had my biggest discrepancy was Green Bay against Pittsburgh. Now, I'm definitely higher on Green Bay than the market and a lot lower on Pittsburgh. So I had a massive discrepancy. I had 5.5 points, which is actually the highest of the season. And I had Green Bay as a 12.5 point favorite at home. Ended up winning the game by 10. So that was a good play. And then on the flip side, and like as I touched on in the beginning, every now and again in like a very public, like highly publicized primetime game, occasionally, and this is a topic for another day, really, but Las Vegas will open a spread, shading the line to a specific side. And, they did that with that Bucks Patriots game. That was easily the most anticipated game of the year. And, according to pretty much every respectable power rating, like mathematically, the highest that the Bucks really could have been in that game was 3.5. I mean, that's what I had. And again, I had Tampa Bay rated as the top team in the NFL. So, my rating for Tampa couldn't have been any higher. And I had New England rated essentially as an average team. So, if you take into account the home field advantage, so, that would be Tampa Bay 107 and a half. And then I actually had New England as 1 point better than an average team. And I even after last game, I think that's accurate. I mean, Mac Jones definitely looks very impressive for a rookie, to say the least. Like his poise in that game was really impressive. Like he threw the ball 40 times, he had no run game, and outside of that one dropped pick, he really played a pretty much, I thought, flawless game. But anyways, so I mean, my point spread for that game was Bucks 3.5. So there was 3.5 points of value there, and you were crossing through the key number of 7, and they end up winning by 2 points. So that was a very rare case where Vegas, in my opinion, took a specific stand, and they opened that line higher, as an intentional. Just basically like they did it intentionally to entice the public to bet on the Patriots side because they knew, I mean, the sharps, we bet numbers, not teams. The betting public's the exact opposite. So whether they opened the Bucks at 3.5 or 6 or 7.5 or 10, even, the public would have likely have just blindly bet the Bucks because they assumed, Tom Brady was going to come in and it was a huge revenge game for him, and they were going to blow out, the pathetic 1-2 Patriots, no matter what the line would have been. So that was an interesting game. And then I know you and I, we were both pretty high on the Cards and maybe a little bit lower on the Rams than the majority of the market, who, the Rams were definitely the darling going into the season. And, after they beat the Bucks, their stock really couldn't have been any higher. But I only had them as a 2.5 or as a 2 point favorite last week. And obviously the Cards came in and ran them out of the stadium. And then the two other ones, and this was another case of a little bit of an overreaction. I had the Bears as a 7 point favorite over the Lions, and that line opened at 6. So, my ratings and, Vegas are very close in those two teams, but the betting public came in hard on the Lions after Fields' disaster of a performance in his first start, which got us a lot of line value. I know you liked the Bears in that game as well. Ended up being a pretty easy winner. Maybe had to sweat a little bit at the end, but ended up covering easily.
That's typical Chicago Bears football for anybody who watches it, unfortunately.
Oh, yeah, exactly right. And I mean, with Nagy at the helm, I don't know if he'll make the whole season, but Field as well. Yeah, I think if you're going to be laying any points with the Bears, you better be ready to sweat if you're watching them. And then, the last game, the Chiefs. I mean, I still have the Chiefs, even though their defense has been horrendous. I mean, it's actually been historically bad. They're allowing over 11 yards per play, which is just absolutely insane. But their offense is still elite. I still have a lot of faith in them. And the thing is, they did the same thing last year, and they did the same thing the year before, the year they won the Super Bowl. Their defense starts off horrendous, and then they get into form as the season moves on. It's sort of Steve Spagnuolo, the defensive coordinator's MO. He just plays very aggressive, and really the way how he schemes that defense, he just wants them to get one big negative play per series, and which will put the offense in a long to go situation, and then that's all it really takes with the way how they scheme in the secondary and bring the pressure to most likely be able to get a stop. But so far through the first 4 weeks hasn't really worked, but I have confidence that by the end of the year, the defense, I mean, it'll still be bad, but it'll be good enough to where they'll be right back, probably as a favorite to win the AFC by the time the playoffs roll around. But again, like I'm really low on the Eagles too. I think the Eagles, I mean, Detroit's awful, Jacksonville's really dysfunctional, and Houston just they're awful as well. I mean, Houston is technically my worst rated team, but Philly's right behind them. So, I mean, I had KC by 11. They were only laying 6.5, and that ended up being a very easy cover. Really, I mean, I know you like that game too, Randall, and you laid a little bit on the alternate line, and that should have gotten home if not for a backdoor cover.
Yeah, that
at
was
least, yeah,
that was
but
brutal. You mentioned Buffalo, or I'm sorry, not Buffalo. You mentioned Houston, as one of your worst teams, in your power ratings. But and we'll talk about this later in the week when we go over the games, for this coming week in the NFL. But this game has my attention. I know that I like to back teams that come off of a shutout loss. When you're flat out embarrassed, whether it be at home or on the road, and if you've played on those teams. The two times that it's happened this year, the Dolphins and the Jets being both of those times. It's 2-0 ATS, and the Jets obviously beat the Titans this past week. That trend since 2018 is now 11-3, and I don't put a lot of stock into trends just simply because they're trends. You've got to get on them pretty early on. If you're late to the party, you're probably getting screwed. But what do you think, just real quick here? You don't have to go into a lot of detail, but what are your thoughts on that Texans-New England game? I think New England could be a little bit flat. An emotional Sunday night game against Tom Brady. They missed the field goal to win. I think
absolutely.
9 is just too many in this spot.
Yeah. So, I mean, and going back to what you said, I mean, the Texans couldn't have looked more pathetic. Shutout, Davis Mills. I mean, I think they had 11 yards of offense at halftime. Like, it was one of the most putrid performances you'll ever see. However, this is still the NFL. No team's as bad as its worst week or as good as its best week. So I actually think, probably fading both of those teams, or fading the Bills and then backing the Texans. That's probably 2-0 this week, maybe at worst 1-1. But according to my power ratings, they agree with you. I have New England only as -7. So you are getting 2 points of value across that key number of 7. And I mean, I agree with you. I mean, I love the Pats last week. That was my biggest play of the season. I just, for what I said, like, that line was way too high. And also, I mean, I actually thought that, Belichick, I mean, this was the most important game probably of his career. Maybe not, for some Super Bowls, but definitely for his legacy. I mean, it was a huge pride game as well for his ego, without a doubt. And, that's why I like the Patriots. I like the Saints the week before, was because I thought, I wouldn't put it past Belichick to even, spend 2 weeks scheming for this game. And to be honest, the defensive game plan that he came out with was genius. It stifled the Patriots. Brady didn't have a single touchdown pass. He looked flustered for the majority of the night. But I agree. I mean, that was an extremely emotional game, and they come up just short. I love to go against teams the following week, in a loss like that where you're so close, you put everything into it, and you come up just short. I mean, that's demoralizing stuff. Now the Pats are 1-3. Yes, they have an easy schedule coming up. This is a must-win game for sure, but it's the old saying: if it's a must-win, you must not be that good. And winning is far different than covering a 9-point spread. I mean, New England is not a team that I'll lay any points with this season. I did week 1. It burned me. I mean, they probably should have won that game. They fumbled at the end against the Dolphins. But, I mean, this is a team that's going to win with defense. They're going to run ball control, because Mac Jones, I mean, at Alabama, he was, he threw downfield. Belichick's just not letting him do it. He's still keeping the training wheels on. I can see a heavy dose of the run. The Patriots don't have to blow these guys out. They just have to win the game. So I agree with you. I
Right.
mean,
Yeah, and
I'm not sure. Sorry,
yeah,
go ahead.
it's got it's just got it's got a low total too.
Exactly right.
Anytime you get a low over under, I honestly see, this game somewhere in the range of, 2014, 2016. I do think the Patriots win, but it won't surprise me if, the Texans pull it off. I think that there's a lot to be said. Like you've gone into detail with Belichick, preparing potentially 2 weeks, potentially all summer, for
Right.
this return. I think the players are definitely mentally and physically exhausted. One last question here, and we'll wrap this first episode of our sharp betting podcast with OddsJam up. I know we both had the Giants last week. What did you see in that game that led you to take the Giants? As you know, I'm a Saints fan, and the Saints were basically away from home for a month, and one of the famous trends or spots, if you will, that Dave Malinsky used to point out, who worked for VSiN. He always talked about teams returning home after long road trips, and especially in this spot, the Saints returning home after the hurricane. There's a lot to get in order, as far as family, your personal lives, how focused they really were on that game. Some of them probably lost a few things in the hurricane, or they had family members impacted by it. So
Oh yeah.
that was kind of the angle that I looked at, and I wrote about this game, and it was just a game that the Saints somehow find a way to lose or not cover. And like I told you, it reminded me a lot of the year they were laying 9.5 to the Vikings in the playoff game, and they were penciled into the NFC
Yep.
Championship, and
Outright
they
loss.
lost outright. So yeah,
Yeah.
what did you see? What did you see in that game?
Yeah. I mean, the Pats is my favorite game of the week, and this is my second. Now, I came into the season a lot higher on the Giants, I think, than everyone else. And, I seemed like an idiot week one, where, that game was actually, I think it was tied, or they were down 3 at home against Denver, but then they ended up getting run out in the second half. But the thing is, like, I am actually a believer in Daniel Jones. I think that he has talent, but, it was just a lot of the scheme and the offensive line. And to be honest, I mean, I've been largely proven right by his play so far this
He's
year.
not a turnover machine. I thought he was a turnover machine. He had a pick in that Saints game, right?
Yeah, Hail Mary at the buzzer, end of the first half. Yeah, just chucked it up. No, but yeah, I mean to be fair, yes. I mean, early in his career, absolutely was a turnover machine. This year,
100%.
He only has 2. I mean, week one, I think he fumbled when he was trying to extend for the first down. I mean, I can't fault that play. I love that kind of physical play, and toughness out of my quarterback. And then last week, like you said, yeah, he threw a pick, but it was a Hail Mary at the end of the half. Who cares?
Yeah, that's I think one thing to just point out, for people that maybe don't watch all of these games like we do, box scores can be very misleading. Depending on what actually happened in the game, that might be a bad example, but a lot of people felt that Daniel Jones turnover machine, and well, he had a pick, but if you watch the game, he chucked it up into half into the end zone, and it was picked off. So it's important, I think, to watch as many games as you can, as well as look at the box scores, but I think there can be some things that can be misleading in there as well.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I personally go back and rewatch every game, but I mean, that's not everyone's forte. I mean, some guys are just amazing at just. I mean, I would say that's probably your strength, is just just identifying the scheduling spots. Just the public perception, things like that. I definitely do take that into account, but I also do, like, a big part of my handicap is just matchups. And I mean, I'm a big box score guy myself, and I mean, speaking of box scores, I mean, Daniel Jones threw for 400 yards last week in that loss against the Redskins. I mean, he actually got nominated for Player of the Week. I personally thought that was probably his best game as a pro. And I mean, honestly, I mean, the Giants are 4 points from being 3-1. So I mean, this
Yeah,
team is not,
yeah,
they're really not nearly as bad as people think. And just to quickly touch on other reasons why I like the Giants, I mean, anyone who's been following this team since Daniel Jones has been there, and especially last year since Judge arrived, I mean, they've been Jekyll and Hyde. I mean, the home road splits for that team is astounding. Last year, I think they went 1-7 ATS at home. Don't quote me on that, but on the road, I know for a fact they went 7-1. And over the past 3 years, they're now 19-6 against the spread on the road. For whatever reason, they play so much better on the road, but it's not even that. It's that when they're on the road, they're getting a lot of points. And this is a team who oftentimes finds a way to lose, but they play close games. So, when the Giants are getting points on the road, they're a great bet, and they fit that spot again this week. But more than anything, I just don't think the Saints. I mean, similar to the Patriots, I don't think that they should really be a large favorite to any team that's competent. I mean, obviously against those bottom three bottom feeders, yes, but up until last week, Winston he didn't throw for over 150 yards in a game. I think he was averaging 114 passing yards through the first 3 games. I mean, Peyton is definitely keeping the training wheels on him as well, trying to minimize his mistakes. And that's just not the recipe to cover point spreads, especially large point spreads against teams who have solid defenses like the Giants. So that was a big reason too. I mean, I was higher on the Giants than most people, and I think, I mean, I think they're a live dog this week. To be honest, I mean, now granted, I was low on Dallas coming into the season. I think McCarthy. I mean, just if you look at all coaches across the board over the past 3 seasons, he single-handedly has the worst against the spread record. I mean, if you watch Hard Knocks, you just know what a buffoon that guy is. But to his credit,
yeah.
I mean, to his credit, this year so far, they've looked good. And, I don't know. I mean, I was heavy fading the Cowboys to miss the playoffs. I took a position on the Giants and the Redskins to win the NFC East. Right now, it's not looking too good, but we still have a lot of season to go. Giants
Well, and
winning this week. Yeah.
yeah,
Giants,
yeah. This
Giants,
is a classic sell high.
absolutely
On
right.
Dallas. So yeah,
Yeah.
you got the clapper coming back to Dallas. So
Oh, you know what?
what's not to love about that?
I didn't even think about that. I didn't even think about that. Yeah. I
Yeah.
like it.
So that's an interesting angle, but like I said, guys, we're planning on doing 2 of these a week. We'll recap the previous week's NFL, as well as a podcast a little bit later in the week. Highlighting some games that we like for this week. So that'll conclude our episode of the Sharp Betting Pod with OddsJam for today. Please tune in later this week as we break down the upcoming games. Also, do not forget to subscribe to the OddsJam YouTube channel, where there's a lot of good content to help you make educated sports bets. Follow OddsJam on Twitter at OddsJam, and then follow the podcast on Twitter as well at Sharp Betting OJ. We'll be back later this week. Good luck on your bets and have a good day.